Hey everybody, and welcome to This Week on Point North. I'm Alistair Stevens, and over the course of the next, let's say 20 minutes, let's try and keep it a little shorter tonight because we are in an unexplored time schedule. It is currently 8 p.m. here in Oklahoma City, right slap bang in the middle of the Central Time Zone, and it's odd to be recording at this time because, well, on the one hand, it's been a little while since I've done an afternoon session. So this isn't quite an afternoon session, but it is still daylight outside, which is weird. And on the other hand, I have another show this evening. So we're going to do our level best to try and get through with some expeditious acuity the work that awaits us in the week ahead here at Point North Media. Hello to Karen and to Sosa Sundare and to Becca and to Skipa, who is joining us. Skipa, you haven't been here in a good long while. It has been a minute. It is very good to see you. Let's talk about everything that we are going to cover this week. As I mentioned, I have another show later this evening. It is the patron-exclusive book club. We are currently discussing Sherlock, the 2010 BBC series starring Benedict Cumberbatch and Martin Freeman. And tonight we are discussing the problematic second episode of that first season, The Blind Banker. You guys, it is not a great hour and a half of television. It's not a terrible hour and a half of television. Like, it is not a disaster, but there are some really interesting and problematic elements which arise from a close discussion of that text. So I will be doing that show at 10 p.m. Eastern, 9 p.m. Central tonight, about an hour from now. In fact, I'm very much looking forward to discussing this episode. Tomorrow, on Tuesday, May the 22nd, at 10 p.m. Eastern, 9 p.m. Central, we will be discussing in Dear Mr. Potter 55, Avada Kedavra. We will be discussing... Well, I don't know how much I want to spoil this. I don't know how much I want to spoil the events of the end of Goblet of Fire here in the context of This Week on Point North, because it is possible that there are people listening to this podcast who haven't yet read Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, who have no real interest in the Harry Potter series, or at least have not expressed an interest in the Harry Potter series yet. Let's just say that we are continuing to pick up from the end of the Triwizard Tournament, and we are discussing the big conflict right at the heart of the Harry Potter series. It is a dark read. It is a challenging read. It is complex and stimulating and cuts right through the boarding school adventure to that kernel of fantasy lore that lies right at the heart of Harry Potter. It is absolutely indicative, this week's reading in particular, of the way that the Harry Potter series grows up alongside Harry as a protagonist, of course, and alongside the readers of the Harry Potter series as this book was originally published. So that is going to be really fascinating. That is, let me double check my notes here, chapters 34 and 35 of Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. Then on Thursday evening, that is May the 24th at 10 p.m. Eastern, 9 p.m. Central, in There and Back Again, episode 64, Back to the Black Gate, we're going to conclude book 5 of The Lord of the Rings. We were aiming at being a little closer than we ended up being at the end of last week's schedule. These are very dense chapters, it turns out. So we have a lot to discuss. We get the Mouth of Sauron. We get the marshalling of the Allied forces at Minas Tirith, and the march first to the crossroads and then up the road, up the Great Southern Road to Morannon, the Black Gate. It's a really great chapter. It's a fantastic piece of stage setting for what comes next in The Lord of the Rings. And it also features one of my favorite passages, and it is about a page and a half in my version of The Lord of the Rings in the volume that you may well be able to see on the shelf behind me. In fact, it's about a page and a half, but I'm talking, of course, about the very end of chapter 10 of book 5 of The Lord of the Rings, Pippin's Last Stand. I just cannot wait to talk about that. So we're going to move a little quickly in this week's There and Back Again session, but it's going to be a blast nonetheless. And then on Friday, let me tell you a little bit about my Friday, shall we? Let's just discuss my plans for Friday. I'm going to get up Friday morning. I'm going to have just a prodigious amount of coffee, and then I'm going to go and see Solo, a Star Wars movie. Then I'm going to come home, and I'm going to write a lecture about Solo, a Star Wars movie, and then I'm going to publish it later that day. It is going to be a hot take, first response kind of lecture about Solo, and I am very excited. I am very excited about this movie. I have been thinking about Solo, honestly, way more than I expected to. I've been thinking about it a lot today, thinking about the way that Han Solo's story, as it has been presented to us through the arc of the numbered episodes in the Star Wars series, the way that that story breaks down, the way that its archetypal movements can best be tracked, the way that it speaks to perhaps not the single greatest theme of Star Wars, but every other theme of Star Wars. Han Solo is not just, of course, an enormously charismatic character, not just anchored in a great performance by Harrison Ford, naturally, but a naturally charismatic character, but he's also epic and archetypal and elemental in a really sophisticated way by the standards of Star Wars. I can't wait to talk about this movie. I'm very excited. It may not be great, but I am absolutely expecting it to be good, and it is too going to set a precedent for whatever comes next. It was rumored / leaked / a test balloon has been sent up by the studio behind Star Wars Disney. There has been some discussion this last week of a new standalone Obi-Wan Kenobi movie, which will film next year for release in 2020. Apparently, according to some sources, a Tatooine-based prologue that takes place immediately prior to the events of Star Wars A New Hope, starring Ewan McGregor, reprising his role from the prequel trilogy. I am very excited about that. To be completely frank and completely honest, I adore Ewan McGregor, and I adore Ewan McGregor as Obi-Wan Kenobi. He is one of the very few things in the prequel trilogy about which very little bad can be said. He's just fantastic, and the evocation of that quintessentially McGregorian twinkly charm, I suppose, is really strong through the prequel trilogy. So I'm optimistic about that movie, but we will see. But all of that, of course, is dependent on the success of Solo. The critical success to a certain degree, but mostly the commercial success of Solo. Solo is a unique movie. And of course, it's coming on the heels of Rogue One. But let's be clear before we even start this film, it's a very different type of film. Rogue One features characters who are, in effect, disposable, right? We don't anchor our experience of Star Wars in Jyn Erso, for example, or in Saw Gerrera, or in any of the other characters in Rogue One for obvious narrative reasons. If you've seen Rogue One and you've seen how that movie turns out, it makes a lot of sense that we don't anchor our experience of the Star Wars universe in any of those characters in particular. But Han is, God, arguably definitive of the Star Wars series, right? He's as definitive as Luke is, I would argue. I think he's in many ways more definitive of the tone and the spirit of the original trilogy. Less so, admittedly, by the time we get to Jedi, where, as I've observed before, Harrison Ford is basically phoning in his performance. Like, there's not a lot of good to be found in Han Solo by the time we get to Return of the Jedi. But through Empire, in particular, he's just fantastic and is as responsible for driving the action as any other character in that movie. I'm really interested to see what we do to allow the Star Wars universe to expand in this way. This is not, of course, a completely unprecedented expansion of the Star Wars universe. We've had an expanded universe for 40 years, basically, at this point, but much of that has been wiped away. Much of that has been purged from the canon. Now we have Star Wars Legends, these old stories which existed in that quasi-canonical space and have now been deemed counter-canonical, but only really if they contradict something that has been established in the new canon. So these stories, the story of the Kessel Run, for example, the original story of the Kessel Run as it was given, that's not canonical anymore, but it's also not canonical. And in terms of its spirit, it is kind of canonical. The detail of the Kessel Run is probably going to be eclipsed. Like, I can't imagine we get a Solo movie that doesn't feature the Kessel Run. I can't imagine that we don't deal with that. And certainly certain images in the trailer for Solo suggest that we are, in fact, going to deal with that, which is great. That's a thing that we should absolutely do. That is the most evocative and hitherto unexplored part of the Han Solo mythos. So I'm all in for that. I think that's going to be completely fascinating. I'm talking too much about Solo, you guys. As you can tell, I am pretty excited. So I'm looking forward to that movie very much. Friday is going to be a long, long day, but it is going to be worth it. And if you are a fan of the story and Star Wars series, look for that on Friday evening, probably. I've set a 9 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. Central release time. If I am done before that, then I'll just release it early. It will be spoiler-filled, but as I say, not comprehensive. I'm then going to follow that up 2 weeks later with another Solo discussion, kind of delving deeper after I've had a chance to see the movie a couple more times and really reflect on it. So this is going to be a two-part discussion. But the first part, the hot take, the immediate response, the thing that the internet loves more than anything else, the hot take response will be out this coming Friday. I can't wait. I did talk last week, actually, about a bonus episode of Story in Star Wars. No, a bonus episode, an extra episode of Story in Star Wars. That is in production right now. There were just too many great emails about The Last Jedi. I did preserve certain topics in The Last Jedi discussion because they are going to spin out into full-fledged discussions later in this unofficial second season of Story in Star Wars, I guess. So we're not losing any shows, but I did want to do like a kind of listener feedback, listener response, deep dive kind of just a mishmash of thoughts on The Last Jedi. So that will be coming out. That may even come out this week. I may be able to get everything lined up so that I can release that on Wednesday. If not, it will certainly come out the following week. So we'll have just a glut of Star Wars content for you over the course of the next couple of weeks, which is fantastic because I'm going to tell you guys, as I said last week, it is Star Wars season. I watched of my own volition with no greater purpose Revenge of the Sith last week. In fact, last week, gosh, it may just have been on Saturday. It has been a packed and frantic weekend here in Oklahoma City, and time has kind of lost all meaning at this point. But I just watched Revenge of the Sith, and I stand by everything I said about that movie. You guys, we get 10 to 15 minutes of really great stuff right at the beginning. Then it loses its way for like a solid hour. For a solid hour, that movie is just, it's nothing. It's just mush right in the heart of that film. But then as soon as we get the declaration, the enacting of Order 66, the movie gets all of this focus and weight and this sense of rising portent and imminent doom. And that carries pretty much all the way to the end of the film. It's incredibly strong. And when we get there, it is worth the wait. So Revenge of the Sith has always been a fascinating movie for me, exactly because of that. Because, yeah, so much of that film is just disposable, right? The Utapau sequence, General Grievous, the way that we dispatch Count Dooku, there's so much in that film that is just, okay, you sure are like meeting your contractual obligation for the running time of a movie. Like that seems to be a thing that you're doing. But then when it comes into focus, I can't help but be caught up in it. As I've said before, it very much depends on the day, but a lot of the time, Revenge of the Sith will be like above Return of the Jedi for me in terms of my discussion of the original trilogy and the prequel trilogy. I'm not a big Return of the Jedi fan. I think that movie just loses its way quite egregiously, actually, in its last half, honestly. But I think Revenge of the Sith comes into focus in its last half. And that really, I suppose, speaks to this notion that our most immediate and most powerful response to a story is going to be caused by the end of the story, right? We're going to be left with, that is when everything that the story is delivers its enormous emotional potential to the degree that it does or can deliver its enormous emotional potential. Endings are incredibly important for that reason. The end of a story is going to be your most powerful and usually most abiding impression of a given story. And if we're contrasting endings, I'm comfortable saying that Sith has a stronger ending than Jedi. That's kind of a controversial opinion. I know many people out there would not even compare those two things because of how structurally and textually different they are. Let me see here as I come back. Oh my God, how did I not mention Donald Glover? Yeah, this is going to be, yes, Donald Glover is genuinely magnificent. He is one of the most exciting and talented and provocative performers in the world right now. Like, he is capable of so much, is so thoughtful and acute. Just, yeah, Donald Glover is already an absolute phenomenon. And I genuinely believe this guy is just getting started. I genuinely believe that 5 years from now, he is going to be the biggest star in the world. I think that his skill with music, with drama, with comedy, I mean, he is, I don't know, what, like a quadruple threat, a quintuple threat. He's absolutely legit and has charisma by the bucket load, which obviously is perfect for picking up from Billy D. Williams in the role of Lando Calrissian. I cannot wait for that. Let me see what else is going on in the chat here. Yes, Mitchell saying that he can totally agree. Donald is the best. Super interested to see the legacy of Solo, and then the chat scrolled, and the other recent movies. Yes, that is one of the outstanding questions, which I don't have a strong prediction for. My guess. Okay, here we go. And I know that there are plot breakdowns of Solo out there on the internet. I haven't looked, as is my way. I won't look at a thing. I won't look at a review. I won't look at a Twitter response. I won't look at a thing until I have written a lecture and got it out there, because I don't want my initial response to this movie to be contaminated by the thoughts of others. There is a time for that, and it is after I've kind of compiled that initial response. But my guess is that we are going to see a thematic, structural, and kind of developmental evolution of what we know the Star Wars universe to be. I don't think that we're going to get a lot of lore. I think the degree to which we get lore, we're going to get either folded backstory, so we're going to find out about Han's blaster or the Corellian blood stripes on his pants or his vest or his lucky dice or whatever. I think we're going to get something there. There's probably going to be a fair amount of that, though I would suspect not too much. I think that's such an obvious trap that Disney is going to be loath to tread into it, because the audience for a movie of this size and scale is not Star Wars fans. It is everyone. That's what Disney is in the business of doing right now. That is true of all of their biggest franchises. They are not playing to Star Wars fans. This is not going to be a nerdy and detail-oriented kind of piece of lore crafting by people who are passionate about that side of the Star Wars universe. It is going to be a focus story. I can't imagine that they would spend this much money on what is a fan-oriented project. That's just not how the movie business works right now. So I don't think we're going to get too much backstory. I'm very interested in the possibility of a connection throwing forward to Kylo Ren, but even that I'm thinking is going to be more within the personal frame than it is the galactic frame. I don't think we are going to radically shift our understanding of what the Star Wars universe is in terms of its world building, in terms of the geopolitics or the technology or anything like that. I think the Star Wars universe is an established sandbox that we are going to play in the context of this film, but I do think that we're going to develop that thematic template, that kind of the texture of what a Star Wars movie is and can be. And that's the way in which we can look at Solo as a continuation of what was begun in Rogue One, right? That is something that Rogue One does beautifully. Rogue One fills in incidental detail. It's interesting enough, incidental detail, but again, we anchor it in the story. It's not about putting the pieces together for the broader Star Wars story. It's about telling a personal narrative, which I think actually works very well. I'm a big fan of Rogue One, as I've discussed before, yeah. Mitchell's asking, speaking of Natalie Portman, has anyone else seen Annihilation? I saw it recently, and how boy, is that one hell of a science fiction story. In short, it won't be the over-explanation of the prequels. Yes, I think that every instinct that there is in Hollywood right now is pushing back against the notion of over-explanation, a la the Star Wars prequels. I do not think that Disney is going to try and fall into that trap. I do not think that they are going to. I do not have complete agreement with those who would opine that the reason the prequel trilogy is bad is that it over-explains everything and drains the magic out of Star Wars. I don't think that's a completely defensible or completely comprehensive critique of the prequel trilogy. However, that is in large part the consensus response to the prequel trilogy. So I think Disney's going to duck away from that. I think we're absolutely going to anchor this in the personal. Why else would you do a Han Solo story, right? There are so many other stories you could tell that would build out what we want to know in terms of that expansion of the geopolitical scape of Star Wars. There are other stories that you can tell. I think the Solo movie is going to be more personal than that, and I think it's going to be more successful for that. And if it isn't successful, it's almost certainly not going to be successful because it is insufficiently personal. I'm talking a lot about a movie that I'm not going to see for another 4 days. Let's see where we are here. Tatooine is a big sandbox, says Wilhelm Scream. Very true. Very true. Yes. No, I haven't seen Annihilation yet. I'm going to tell you something, though, you guys. I'm a huge fan of Natalie Portman. I am a big fan of Natalie Portman. I think that she pretty much consistently rises above the material that she has presented. Now, she has done some dubious movies. She has done some questionable movies with some underwritten roles, I suppose, but pretty much always she exceeds the material that she's given. It's really just been in the last couple of years that I've really developed an appreciation for Natalie Portman. And certainly going back to the prequel trilogy, I think she's great. I think she's great when she is given the opportunity. When the script doesn't literally hamstring her, when the script doesn't literally just break her character over its narrative knee, then she's fantastic. I think of the end, of course, of Attack of the Clones, the least good Star Wars movie that there is. But Padme Amidala gets to be fantastic for like 15 minutes at the end of that movie, which is just great. And yes, she gets moments to shine in every movie but Sith. I suppose just the first two movies. Then I think she gets moments to shine in Menace and moments to shine in Clones and doesn't really get a lot to do in Sith. Though even then, she gets some scenes with Ewan McGregor, which are just beguiling, bewitching. They're just lovely. There is a real romantic chemistry between Natalie Portman and Ewan McGregor in the course of the last act, I suppose, of Revenge of the Sith, and I like a great deal. Yeah, here I am, just talking about Star Wars again. Yeah, the first 3/4 of Thor: The Dark World, says Wilhelm Scream. Yeah, absolutely right. Yeah. Particularly when she's taken to Asgard and we get the Soul Forge scene. She is so good in that moment. She is on par with anyone else in that movie for that moment. She gets too little to do in Thor: The Dark World. She gets almost nothing to do in the original Thor, of course, and is then quietly shuffled out of the MCU by the time we get to Thor Ragnarok. But yeah, Jane Foster is an underwritten character, but I think Natalie Portman brings a great deal of charm to that role. Speaking of Thor and all such things, I'm just going to spoil the end of this week's Excelsior recording for you guys. Earlier today, we released the Excelsior recording. Excelsior, for those of you coming in late, is my comic book and comic book movie podcast that I produce over at Common Room Radio with I co-host with the wonderful Sarah Cade Pazant and Vinton Bain. We have announced as of today that show is going on something of a summer hiatus. The show is not going to disappear. We are going to be back around with a couple of episodes over the course of the summer, but Vinton has a lot of really exciting life changes right now, which are just wonderful. His career is taking him in a really interesting direction. He is training hard and working hard and doing genuinely great things, and we're all extremely proud of him. Unfortunately, that means that there just isn't a lot of time for podcasting about comic books, which I know breaks his heart and breaks mine too. So Excelsior is going on a bit of a hiatus over the summer, which does leave a bit of a gap for a comic book oriented podcast. I'm making no promises, but I do have some thoughts. I will say no more than that right now. But I think I might do a very short form, limited series, kind of deep dive, nerdy and self-indulgent comic book thing over the course of the next couple of months. I need to work out the details, and certainly I need to get through Solo Weekend first. But yeah, that's on the table there. So I hope that you guys aren't too upset about Excelsior going dark for a little bit. We're going to be back. We definitely have one show coming up in June, and then we're going to be back in the beginning of July with a podcast about Ant-Man and the Wasp, and then we'll be back, I don't know actually exactly when the schedules are going to line up again. As I say, it's out of my hands, but I wish Vinton very well. I wish him every happiness. He is a genuinely lovely man, a genuinely great mind, the biggest heart that I've ever met in my life, and I wish him every success in his new endeavors. So you'll hear about that right at the end of this week's Black Panther commentary track over on Excelsior, which, as I say, you can find at the commonroomradio.com website, is the way that I was going to formulate that sentence, which, I mean, it's fine. Sometimes I just slip back and it's 1998 all over again. So if you go to http://www.commonroomradio.com, all lowercase, then you'll be able to find that podcast among other things. Yes. Good. All right. Oh, so Sundry is saying, oh, good, please get Sarah as well. I can't last the summer without you dudes. Yeah, we're planning. We're planning. Sarah also has some huge life changes going on right now too. So yeah, this is a very good time for that show to go on hiatus. But yeah, I mean, we can't go that long. We've been doing 2 podcasts a week with Excelsior for the last almost 20 weeks, doing the Road to Infinity War commentary series and also our regular comic book episodes. So we've been spending a lot of time in each other's company, and that is not going to change. So I'm sure that there will be special episodes and one shots and all kinds of things dropping left and right, hither and yon, I'm sure. Yes, good. Let me see as I catch up. Wilhelm Scream says he's been catching up on the Excelsior commentaries from the MCU movies. That's so great. They have been an absolute blast. The commentary tracks are just so very different. They're so relaxed. They're so conversational. They're just, yeah, it's a bunch of friends watching a movie. We've talked about many of those films before in a more analytical and constructive context, I suppose. So the opportunity to go back through every single movie and to discover some real delights, like to discover the fact that Thor: The Dark World is between 2/3 and 3/4 a really great movie that just whiffs the ending violently. But for the bulk of its running time, it's a really great movie. To discover that we really liked Doctor Strange, to discover that movies that we had personally loved in our initial responses, like Avengers Age of Ultron, actually don't hold up that great and are complicated and problematic. And then, of course, to come through the last year of the MCU and to see Thor Ragnarok, the brilliant Thor Ragnarok, to see Spider-Man Homecoming, to see Black Panther, then to go into Infinity War, it has been just a really exciting ride. So yeah, that show is not done. It is a hiatus. It is not a permanent cancellation or anything like that. It's just going to be on a very loose schedule for a few months, and then we'll see where we are and come back for season 2. Yeah. All right, guys, that is going to do it. I think I have to wrap this up because, as I say, I have another show in about a half hour. So let's run through this very quickly. At 10 p.m. Eastern, 9 p.m. Central, this very evening, in 36 minutes as of this recording, I will be discussing the second episode of the first season of Sherlock over in the Patreon exclusive book club. If if you are listening to this, if you're joining me live and you are not a Patreon supporter of Point North Media, then it's not too late to rectify that. You can head on over, you can pledge $1. That gets you into this discussion and all the other discussions. It also gets you some special class discounts. If you guys are on the Patreon page for Point North Media, go scroll down a little bit and you'll see some discounts on all the Point North Media classes, patron exclusive discounts on all the Point North Media classes. That's just a thing that I really wanted to do and finally got around to setting up. So there they are. You can head on over to patreon.com/pointnorthmedia for that. So we're going to spend an hour talking about the Blind Banker. That is going to be an absolute blast and an absolute pleasure. Tomorrow, 10 p.m. Eastern, 9 p.m. Central, Dear Mr. Potter, 55 Avada Kedavra, in which we just get to it. We're doing the transition point here between Harry Potter as a juvenile story and Harry Potter as an adult story. We are going to test Harry himself to the very limits of his endurance and beyond. We're also going to get very quietly in the background of this sequence some genuinely fantastic world building. We're not covering many pages in this week's reading because it is going to be dense. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about he who must not be named and the Death Eaters and the application of the unforgivable curses. And boy, there's just so much before we even get back to Hogwarts. So all of that to look forward to tomorrow night, Thursday, 10 p.m. Eastern, 9 p.m. Central, there and back again, 64, back to the Black Gate, the return to Morannon, the march of the forces of the West. We're going to talk about heroism, and we're going to talk about sacrifice, and we're going to talk, of course, as we have talked consistently throughout Book 5 of The Lord of the Rings, about hope. And then we're going to get to what is narratively, if not heroically, right, to distinguish those two things. Within the fiction, this is not Pippin's finest hour, but from the perspective of someone who is reading the book, this is Pippin's finest hour. We're going to get a page and a half of just genuinely great Pippin material that, in its way, encapsulates and refracts and codifies and I'm trying to think of a more positive word than disassembles, but analyzes, splits into its constituent parts for better scrutiny and examination. Everything that we've discussed through Book 5 of The Lord of the Rings. I cannot wait for that. Then next week, of course, we get back to Frodo and Sam. Then on Friday evening, sometime, Story in Star Wars 14, the episode on Solo, a Star Wars story. I can't wait for that. I'm sure there's going to be a ton of discussion and a ton of email about that too. So stick around for more Story in Star Wars discussion, and that will do it for this week on Point North. Guys, thank you all so much for joining me this evening for this special rescheduled this week on Point North. We'll be back on a regular schedule next week. I will hope to see you all at noon Eastern, 11 a.m. Central Time next Monday morning, so we can lay out another week. We can do this all over again. How exciting is that? How exciting is that every Monday we get together and just do this again. This is the best thing. I will talk to you all again very soon. You guys, I hope I will see many of you in the book club discussion in about a half an hour. If not, I will see you tomorrow for DMP, Thursday for There and Back Again. You'll get your podcast feed on Friday for Story in Star Wars, or we'll all meet again next Monday morning to talk about another week on Point North Media. Until then, take care. Good night all.